Finally, thank you for joining. This is live. Please enjoy, please learn, and please get some questions in if you want to ask our two fantastic speakers about the legal process. So back to today, as I said, we're talking about sports entertainment law. This is for athletes, players, rights holders, brands, sports agencies, media companies, and anyone involved in sports and gaming. We're covering the 360 degrees of rights management, royalties, revenue collection, working with brands, merchandising, and more, all in 40 minutes. To answer the questions, really, why do I need a lawyer? What are their main roles and value? And that's for buyers, sellers, players, and teams. We've got two brilliant speakers today. We have Luca Ferrari, who is from Studio Legale with us, and Nandan Kamath, who lists himself on our website as a lawyer. So he's in the right place.
Thank you, Jasper. Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us at Sports Matters Academy Legal Matters. My name is Kevin McCullagh, editor in Asia Pacific for SportBusiness, the global sports industry news and business information service. Today, we're talking about work and careers within sports law with two leading sports lawyers. We're going to be finding out what role lawyers play within the sports ecosystem, getting to grips with some of the key legal concepts that underpin sports law, and finding out a bit more about careers within sports law. Nandan and Luca are two extremely experienced sports law professionals with a wealth of wisdom to share with us on these topics. As Jasper said, if anyone watching wants to ask any questions throughout the broadcast, please put them in the software and we'll put them to Nandan and Luca. So let's meet our special guest today. Nandan, if I could start with you. Great to have you on Sports Matters Academy. Thank you so much for joining us. Could we get a quick introduction? Could you tell us who you are, where you are, and what you do?
Absolutely. My privilege actually to be on the show. I am a lawyer practicing out of Bangalore in India. We have a practice which focuses on sports and gaming law as well as technology and entertainment. So a large part of our practice is around the rights of different participants in the sporting world. That could be athletes, it could be sponsors, it could be brands, it could be federations, and often is sort of a mix of all of these. So in many ways, we are the support infrastructure for sports business. A lot of our work is transactional, some of it is governance related, but it's really in some sense to keep the plumbing of the sports business alive. We are in some sense a significant support service to the sports industry.
Very good. And to expand upon that introduction a little bit, Nandan, could you tell us how you became a sports lawyer? What's the brief story of that journey?
So as for sports and lawyer, I think I took up the sports bit first. So I was a young cricketer playing quite serious cricket before I went to law school. Then just sort of happened my way into law school in India, realized that maybe there was a career in law, went and did that for a few years, and then actually came back to India about 15 years ago and started getting quite a few questions from people I played with, people I knew in the sports industry. I wouldn't say a traditional sports lawyer, almost created by circumstances and created by my past, but also the people I ended up knowing while playing. But also what happened is a lot of my work was related to intellectual property and technology and related matters. And a lot of that became relevant in the sports industry as it grew, because the time I came back was also when the Indian Premier League took off here and professional sport in India became pretty significant. So it was really some of the skills that I had, the interest and the passion that I sort of displayed as a young person, in some sense colliding with market need. So in many ways, very fortunate with timing, but that interest having an outlet, it was a very fortunate time for me.
Very good. Thank you, Nandan. Luca, if I could come to you for a similar introduction, could you tell us a bit about who you are, where you are, and what you do?
Oh, thank you, Kevin. So I'm head of sports at Withers, which is an international law firm with very many different offices around the world. I am based in Milan, although I spend a lot of time in London, and I try to coordinate within Withers our sector focus on sports, and so different specialists working around sports. So basically a commercial lawyer by training, corporate commercial lawyer, mostly focused on international work, and have been dedicating myself for many years to sports, generally speaking, a lot involving football, as in soccer, and tennis, motorsports, swimming, so across different disciplines.
Very good. And again, to expand upon your introduction a little bit, can you tell us how you became a sports lawyer?
Yeah, there's a little bit of serendipity, as in everything in life, I guess. I mean, I was mostly training and studying as an international commercial lawyer. I was probably also focusing on international trade law, and I was basically on a plane to an international trade law master program in Finland, and I happened to overhear a conversation between a lawyer / agent and a pretty known player. So I knew enough about football to recognize the player, and I have been playing football until I was about 20 years old. So I just, because I was just fresh out of school, I just went there and introduced myself. And because I heard that they were looking for, in the conversation, they were talking about looking for a trainee or someone from law school to help them out. And I said, yeah, well, I'm looking for a job. So if you would like to try me out, yeah, I might be available. So he said to quit the trade law course in Finland and start working with him in Italy. It happened to be the agent of Alessandro Del Piero, so I was exposed pretty soon to some kind of top football deals and transactions.
Well, it must have been a very exciting way to start.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Luca. Well, let's drill into I want to establish some of the basics around the sports law profession here, and to understand a little more what sort of roles lawyers play within the sports industry. Luca, you're on screen, so I'll stay with you for the moment. Can you tell us a bit about who your clients are and what exactly you do for them?
Yeah, as a firm, we serve clients across, I think, the whole spectrum. So we have we work for athletes, of course, individuals being probably the typical client that Withers works for. But we've also worked for agents and intermediaries. We are working for clubs. We work for governing bodies in sports and sponsors. So we really sort of capture the entire industry and all the stakeholders there. And depending on what type of client we work for, we advise, we act as I would say, as a guardian, almost as a protector for example, a young athlete starting his career, or as a very sophisticated, maybe transactional lawyer for a right holder, negotiating an important licensing agreement. So it does vary.
Okay, very good.
In terms of role.
We'll dig into what being a guardian or helping with transactions actually means in a couple of minutes. But let me zoom over to Nandan. And Nandan, you did touch on who your clients there or who your clients are and what you do for them. But can we just revisit that again? Who are your kind of main body of your clients, and what sort of work do you do for them?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. It's actually not that different from Luca. I think any sports lawyer will have this bouquet of different stakeholders. So coming from the athlete up to the event organizer and all of the people in between. So we have clients who are broadcasters. We have clients who are federations and teams. We also work with sponsors. So essentially someone trying to engage an athlete or to get on air and sponsor an event. So it's really the whole 360 of participants in the sports ecosystem. And a lot of it is to understand what each of them, what their interests are, what their entry points into the the business opportunity is. And in many ways, like Luca talked about, helping them, one, navigate the system and understand what the opportunities are, but also help them think about risk. So just understand risk, but also in many ways buffer risk and to plan ahead. So recognizing there's things that can happen through an opportunity, but systematically thinking through why they're doing it, how they can go about doing it, and how to maximize value from their participation, while also recognizing the commitments that they're making to that sport, to that event, or in some way to that sponsor.
Okay, very good. Nandan, sticking with you, so let's drill into some of that work a little more. So I can hear that much of the work revolves around working on the various types of intellectual property rights that arise from sport: sponsorship rights, media rights, licensing rights, image rights, and more. Can you drill in a bit further and tell us what lawyers do to help sports organizations and athletes make use of those rights? And if possible, give us maybe an example or two from your own work.
Yeah, so I think a great question. I think it's a lot of it is based in intellectual property law. In fact, the whole sports businesses, when you look at it, on the one side, you have broadcasting and media rights, which are sort of entrenched in copyright and broadcasting law. And on the other hand, you have merchandising and sponsorships, which are very driven by trademark law. And I think both of these are very based on the concept of exclusivity, which is essentially giving a certain bunch of people rights while they pay for it, and making that sort of that relationship meaningful. Part of it is also ensuring that other people can't sort of get in without sort of contract, so that managing those exclusivities. But a lot of the work, Kevin, comes down to sort of planning, in some sense, a rights package, understanding where that person sits from the event down to the athlete. And there are various different things to keep in mind. So, for example, a young cricketer playing in a league, to understand what is the possibility to sponsor someone who's participating in a league, you need to understand what rights you have as a player. So, for example, in a cricket setup, you have a waterfall of rights. And from the event organizer down to the player, there are very different rights that reside in each person. So, for example, the cricketer might only have the rights to what are called the tools of the trade, to use a cricket bat of his choice or her choice, shoes, so just the basic things. The minute you move a step up, for example, the jersey, you will have the team who gets the rights to put logos on it, and the player doesn't get any rights. So, for example, if you have a young player saying, okay, what are my endorsement opportunities, sponsorship opportunities, you help the person off the field, but you also recognize the limitations of what that person can do within sort of an organized sport context. So helping them understand what rights they have, and helping them in some sense to on-sell them, license them, and to do all of that in a way that sort of they're complying with regulation, but also law. I mean, that's a pretty basic example, but as you go up, it gets more complicated. The minute you have sponsors, you have teams, you have federations, and in some sense, federations and the organizers are cutting the pie, making sure that there's value for everyone, and making sure that someone who's coming in gets value and is able to take out value as well in a good balanced way.
Okay. Yes. One thing I was going to ask you is what stage lawyers get involved at in all these transactions. From what you're saying, it sounds like lawyers may get involved at different stages, maybe depending on the sophistication of the client. Is that right?
I think Luca also adverted to it, right? You could have a young client who's actually looking and leaning on you for many things, while you might have a much more sophisticated client who has an agent, who has an agency, who's done all of the structuring and is really looking for, in some sense, closing the deal with documentation. And you see the whole range. Perhaps in less mature sporting ecosystems, you'll have more of the former, where in many ways the lawyer is expected to not just know the law, but also sort of de-risk and plan sort of the business elements to something. We see that quite a bit, where you're playing, in some sense, many hats. But that can vary, like you said, and some of it is also just understanding that regulation and risk are attached in many ways. And the way I talk to people about the role of the lawyers, I mean, the relationship between someone who wants to build a house and an architect. You can build a house without an architect. I mean, you'll still have a house at the end of it. But in many ways, an architect helps you with the plumbing, it helps you with the planning, helps you with also the code that you have to follow in your neighborhood. So there's a much broader aspect of planning, and the architect asks you the questions to help you try and find the type of house you're trying to build. And in many ways, that is the role of the lawyer, to, in some sense, reveal to the person what role they can play and the way they can think about and navigate the sort of the pretty complex ecosystem of sport, navigating multiple different stakeholders or trying to each get a piece of the pie.
Okay, very good. Luca, I'd like to come across to you on kind of the same topic and find out if what Nandan has said there reflects the work that you do whenever it comes to helping sports organizations make use of their intellectual property. Does what he said, does that apply exactly to your work?
No, definitely, yes. I mean, he said it all and well. I mean, it's a very dynamic and very competitive landscape somehow, and you have sophisticated players. Sometimes it's a battle between equals, and you kind of play a very technical role as a lawyer. Sometimes you have to protect the weaker part in the deal, because you see, you have three powerhouses here. The one being the regulators that sort of craft regulations to cut their space in the most convenient way, and sometimes they're both regulators and right holders. Then you have the the big brands and companies and sponsors and big agencies, for example. They're all very well managed and sophisticated kind of business strategists. And then you have the athletes, and those are sometimes strong enough and big enough to sort of have a good bargaining power, but most of the times they're not. And especially when at the beginning of their career, when they're just looking for some money to sort of finance the startup of their career, for example, they're in a very weak position, because what happens is most of the sponsors or investors, including managers, would finance them, help them out, support them, in exchange for very tight and long-term commitments, which means renewals, automatic renewals, right of first refusal, mechanism of increase of compensation that is not necessarily exactly following the progress in the career of the player, but most importantly, freedom of contract is at stake there, because it happens very often that a player has entered into an agreement when he's 18, and by the age of 21 or 22, he's totally different person, totally different brand, but he's kind of in a cage because of the way he wasn't properly advised back then.
Wow, yeah, and from our coverage of the sports industry, as journalists and analysts here at SportBusiness, we've seen athletes and gamers now becoming bigger businesses in their own right as time has went on. Social media, digital media has given them platforms. They're able to build brands now in a way that they weren't able to in the past. Is this creating new legal challenges and new demand for your legal advice, Luca?
Oh, well, yeah, definitely. I mean, first of all, there is an increasing awareness of the importance of securing that whatever you own is well protected and well defined. And it's all about the law and what the law gives you by way of tools to defend your own property, being, for example, image rights, which can be both an individual's image rights or a company's image rights. But in any event, unless you can rely on clear rules that sort of define your exclusive ownership of those rights, there is no market for it, because it's free for all. So it's identifying that area of exclusivity, commercializing it in the right way, protecting it, as Nandan was saying before, and of course, new markets open up all the time. So we've seen now with NFTs, for example, and the whole digital space, but also the metaverse. You have to just evolve and understand that you have to monitor and increase the width of protection, making sure you're duly protected early on in different markets that are coming up.
Very good, Nandan. If I come over to you on the on athletes and possibly gamers, how much work do you do with individual athletes, and how is the environment in which they're operating changing, and how is that affecting what sort of advice you're giving to them?
Yeah, so India is growing rapidly. So we're seeing a lot of professionalization of individual and team sports. For the most of the past decade, we had a few athletes here and there, and that sort of ratio is changing significantly as each of them are looking not just at endorsement opportunities, but we've seen this wave of now investment opportunities for athletes. So where athletes are actually investing in brands through sort of deals rather than getting paid as endorsers. So we've seen a huge shift there of the use of athletes as equity holding ambassadors. That's been quite an active bit of the last 2-3 years. We don't see that much of individual gamers. I think esports is still taking off in India, but we've done a lot of work in gaming, and that actually makes it very interesting, where you're sort of transporting real world sport to the virtual context. And like I think Luca was alluding to, many people are sort of playing catch up there. With the world of real sport, I think you have regulation, which is clear, and many ways you fit into the regulation. But when you move to virtual environments, in some sense, you're the first wave, and you're making rules as you go along, staking new territory. So very interesting. So if you were to try and build a moat in a place where there aren't regulations, you might behave very differently from what you would do in sort of the traditional sport context. So as you move to NFTs, as you move to the metaverse, there are these concepts of ownership, exclusivity, who was there first. All of them are sort of there for the taking, and it actually raises many interesting questions of who owns sort of the original and who can own the copy. I'm sure Luca's dealing with very similar and very interesting issues on the metaverse and NFTs and fan tokens and other things like that, but also moving sort of traditional games to the virtual world. We have seen the virtualization of so many sports, which makes it fascinating. I mean, it's really sort of a buffet for any young person looking at law, but also looking at technology, looking at sort of the future of the way we interact, not just play. I think sports law is fascinating in that way, and I just love what I do in that sense.
And Nandan, on this, I think that sometimes is technology opening up new markets, and sometimes is in the physical world, it's challenging the rules that opens up new markets. Like we have seen now with NCAA athletes making finally their case about being able to commercialize then their image rights and being paid for what they do. And I'm thinking also about the Olympic Games regulations, where athletes have finally managed to kind of sort of fight that Olympic truce, whereby they weren't allowed to run their campaigns during the Olympic Games, and being the sponsors of an athlete that just competes once every 4 years in the Olympics, of course, extremely interested in exploiting that particular moment in the career of the athletes. I think it was a big hindrance, I guess, to the monetization and their financial support, monetization of their career. And you see, I mean, we've just sometimes you have to muscle yourself into new markets in a way.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, I think in Europe, so much of your work has been around competition law as well. So opening up new opportunities for new participants. We see a little bit less of that here, but certainly it's something that's going to grow as the market grows. And you see these different waves of transactional law, regulatory law, and litigation as well. And I think in some more mature markets, you see all of them at the same time. In markets like India, that may come in phases. So first, the industry grows, and then regulation is under pressure is a way we're seeing, where regulation has to sort of keep up if it has to keep the trust of the markets. And as those sort of collisions happen, litigation also happens. So there's, regardless of what your interest is in law, I think there's a sports component to any of it. Whether you want to be a litigator, you want to be a corporate lawyer, you want to be a commercial lawyer, there's something for everyone. And I think that's what makes it interesting too.
Luca, whenever we spoke yesterday, you talked about helping clients navigate the world of regulations within sport. And it strikes me, within sport, you've got regulations coming from sports bodies themselves, and then you also clearly have legislation. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What are the kind of the key regulations that you find yourself helping clients navigate through, and what sort of clients need to understand them?
Well, I mean, it's a heavily regulated market, so to speak, because you have, usually a centralized kind of structure that sets the rules for all market players. And so whether you're a player, an athlete, a sponsor, or a club owner, a team owner, you would always have to navigate the rules. And it could be, about financial fair play, for example, and making sure that you have all things in order to get a license for the championship. It could be about the substances and your whereabouts, communicating every single day of the year where you are as an athlete to the entity that would control doping offenses. It would be about agents and intermediaries, whether they're allowed or not allowed, and to what extent to represent their players, and when they misrepresent or or when the players appoint an agent that is not authorized to represent, and according to the governing body's rules, there are a number of sanctions against players. So it's you always have to be aware, basically, of the regulations and the way they change. For example, now we all know, and you sort of have to look ahead and know what's coming all the time. So that's why you need to be a specialist. You can't just be a generalist and then provide an advice to a client that comes to you with an issue regarding, for example, a player management or player representation agreement. If you're not aware that as of January 2023, FIFA will enact new international agents regulations, whereby the agents is only allowed to a certain commission, working in a given way with his client, that all image rights management agreements should be part of that sort of cap, etc. You can't provide the right advice to your client. So, it's a yeah. Sometimes it's almost a whack-a-mole kind of situation where you try to understand what's changing in the rules and trying to adapt contracts and relations all the time.
And then from time to time, we have these kind of, the earth shifts, right? We've got these moments like Bosman ruling or like the NCAA, and it can create a whole new environment and whole new business opportunities for your clients.
I'm old enough to remember the day that decision came out, upholding Bosman's case and sort of declaring that all regulations about players transfers and the money that had to be paid even for a free agent that is a player at the end of his agreement in order for another club to hire him was just unlawful, illegal, and the whole market changed immediately. And but then again, the clubs would adapt to the new situation, ask their lawyers, how can I protect myself so that my player never becomes a free agent, for example? And you'd have to find all the ways to sort of build a contract so that if before you could just easily sit down and wait until the contract's expiry in order to renegotiate with the player, now you have to start sort of your negotiation. Sometimes it's a fair negotiation, sometimes it's less of a fair negotiation, maybe 1 or 2 seasons before the contract terminates. So, yeah.
Fascinating stuff. Nandan, can I come to you on going back to the world of IP again? And again, something we talked about in a previous conversation. You talked about the work you've done in helping protect the IP of your clients, and specifically in anti-ambush marketing. Can you tell us a bit about, give us a wee bit of background about why you have to protect the IP of clients, who's attacking it, and what you actually do in order to do that?
Yeah, so a large part of our work over many years, in particular with cricket, has been, in some sense, protecting the business model of sport, which includes the broadcast rights, merchandise, as well as sponsorship rights. So that a fair bit of it is, in some sense, educating people about the existence of these rights, which includes public education, the awareness of intellectual property through public notices. But also what we've done is, in some sense, sponsors who have exclusive rights or broadcasters who have exclusive rights, in some sense, educating their competitors as well. So we do large campaigns around educating competitors of sponsors on what their rights are. And what are we trying to do? We're essentially trying to protect the model and the revenue model for sport, which is to include a few people who pay to associate by excluding a bunch of others. So if it was possible to just sort of participate through sponsorships or broadcasting without permission, there would really be no market. It's based on exclusivity, based on someone enjoying these rights without disturbance. So a lot of that comes down to also the way content is distributed today, looking at online and offline piracy, having monitoring setups to help reduce the amount of sort of leakage of revenue from sporting rights holders. You also have programs around merchandise and fake merchandise, particularly now on e-commerce stores and other things like that. So you build what is called a rights protection program. It could be for an event, it could be for an organization, it could be for a broadcaster, where in some sense you ring fence these rights and protect them, right from education to monitoring to enforcement to litigation. So essentially running an entire program of enforcing and actualizing the rights and making sure that the business model remains protected. And there's also lots of interesting stuff. It's not just about sort of the activity, but also putting the regulatory structure in place. It could be through ticketing terms. It could be through the broadcast and media rights agreements. So building an overall program that makes all of these rights work together and to give the value to the person who's willing to pay for them. And it makes for a fascinating, almost like jigsaw puzzle, where it matters what people are doing within the stadium, what spectators are allowed to do, what a player is allowed to do. So, for example, in many of the football contexts, a player will get fined if they sort of lift their jersey and show a logo on their body. And that is part of the sort of the ambush marketing plan that you would put in place to protect brands from end to end. So whether it's in the stadium, whether it's in the concourses, whether it's on broadcast, or whether it's sort of on the sort of the advertising that's outside the venue or anywhere in the world for that matter. So it's in many ways recognizing how the business model of sport works, and in some sense tightening the screws to keep value going. Because if you actually didn't keep that tight, the next time over, someone might not feel that there's that much value left in paying for these rights.
Very good, thank you. And we've got a question from the audience on intellectual property rights. Luca, you said you could take this. Let me try and capture it here. So it's from Risharaj, a law student, and he's asking, considering the rise in the discussion for patenting sports moves and copyrighting sports celebrations, could intellectual property rights be extended to these in the future?
Well, you can't copyright a celebration, although sometimes it is interesting choreography there when they celebrate. But most importantly, what you can do is now you can capture these moments and transform them into an NFT. And once you have done that, you have sort of encapsulated that particular moment. You have sort of an ownership on it. Where are the challenges? The challenges are where that moment is a public moment. It's a public moment that can be narrated and or reported under freedom of information. And when it is relevant, of course, it will be reported. And everything that involves transformative use, for example, for creating dramas, for example, that include reference to real life people and celebrations, etc., or information and media, the right of free press and information, sort of limits the possibility of exploiting. As Nandan was saying before, you're the more efficient in commercializing a right, the more you can protect them from other people using them for free. However, a celebration, for example, is a good example of a situation where you can possibly prohibit all media outlets to sort of portray a given player when he celebrates a goal or a special moment. If it's private, it's a different thing. If it's a private moment, if it's within a private place, that would be different.
Thank you, Luca. Nandan, do you have any additional thoughts on that? Perhaps in relation to what Luca touched on there, that NFTs can potentially perhaps capture some sort of IP around moments like that you could exploit in the future.
Yeah, I think there's also the question there of actually moves, right? So sporting moves that are actually part of the action. And I think there's lots of reasons to say that you should not have any exclusivity over them. I think one Luca alluded to, which is a lot of sport is actually responsive. It's not choreographed. There might be a few sports where you've planned ahead and sort of there's creativity involved, but very often you're sort of responding to action. But there's also serious policy implications of taking some moves out of play, right? At the end of the day, you'll have to have an intellectual property lawyer sitting in the dugout saying, okay, you're allowed to do that, you're not allowed to do that. And I don't think that's where sport's going to go. In some sense, it is a commons. Anything that you do on the field of play is built on the work of others. And by taking something out of play, you're actually limiting further innovation and growth. So I would say if it's a fadeaway shot or the way to hit a cricket ball, you certainly would not be giving exclusivities to things like that. And the whole concept of sport is continuous improvement, and every athlete is building on the past that they've seen, they've watched, they're trying to emulate. And by taking sort of building blocks out of play, you actually remove the sort of one of the basic essences of sport, in my view.
Yes, I'd kind of be fearful for the reaction of the public to lawyers if you were helping people copyright certain moves on the pitch.
No, but people in the past have tried to argue that even football games or sports games generally are, works of they can be copyrighted as being, equal to dramas or musicals or whatever. But the reality is there is no inventive and no creation involved. It's all happening and spontaneous, and therefore, while you can protect the production, of course, of the event by whomever is licensed to do that, you can actually protect the game itself with the copyright.
Okay, and this is quite interesting. Didn't mean to go down this hole, but so what's the actual technical difference in this sense between a game of football and a piece of drama on television?
It's the intellectual work you would put in order to create this opera or this movie or this musical. That it's all created as an invention, as something that doesn't really exist before you, in your own mind and brain, sort of make the music or make the movie or make something. So a game is more of an action where people don't follow a plot or a screenplay. They just spontaneously apply their skills to the rule of the games. The rule of the games might be copyrighted, of course, but the game itself wouldn't.
Okay, got it. We probably better not go too far down some of these philosophical holes, or we'll be here for several hours.
Does it sound so philosophical, really? Oh, okay. I didn't. It kind of seems so natural to me, but I guess maybe not to everyone.
Let's move on. I was one of the questions I want to ask around IP rights is that what are some of the newer forms of IP that we're seeing emerging within sports that are driving business for you or your clients? Nandan, if I could start with you.
Yeah, I think we've seen a fair bit of now virtual gaming, so virtualization of real world sport, but also gaming of its own, which involves a fair bit of licensing. But that has moved progressively to NFTs and now fan tokens, where you're sort of, in some sense, giving fans a little bit of an opportunity to participate back. So it's essentially the reverse loop back into sport. So you're listening to your fan. They might not be material decisions at this point of time. It may be literally what color should the changing room walls be? Should they be blue or green or red? But giving fans a notion that they're stakeholders, there's a lot of opportunity there, and we're seeing early bits of that across teams and federations. But people are still navigating the broader ecosystem of how that plays out, because in many ways there's a fair bit of both regulatory as well as sort of legal uncertainty over who owns what rights. So, for example, if you have Dhoni hitting a six and winning the World Cup in the World Cup final, there are lots of different things happening there. You have a broadcaster who's bought the rights. You have the event organizer who's organized the event. You have a bowler who's actually bowled that ball. And then you have a bunch of sponsors on that jersey. So if you're going to create an NFT out of it, is it just enough to get the players' permission, or do you need a permission of 5 or 6, 7 different people? Secondly, once that's in that place, what the other question that gets asked is, now, is this a good or a service? How will it be treated for tax purposes? What's sort of the in many ways the other risks that come from it? Do I have exposure that if this in some sense gets copied and sold in other markets, does the value of my original go away? So we're seeing a lot of these interesting questions, which are in some sense overlap of intellectual property, commercial law, but also regulatory law, where broader regulation, a lot of the regulation around crypto and NFT is not sport specific, but sport has to collide into the sort of the general regulatory framework of taxation, of legality, of other aspects, like I said, of legal treatment even.
Luca, same question to you, and perhaps thinking about NFTs, clearly a very hot topic in sports the last couple of years. There's been a lot of investment in them. What sort of questions are clients coming to you with, and what sort of advice are you giving out around that?
Yeah, well, NFTs is it's an opportunity, of course, for the players as well, but also for sponsors and for teams and for clubs and for the organizations. Therefore, I think that the most important thing for a lawyer is to make sure that whomever you work for, whomever you are advising, that the contract reflects the limits within which each of the different participants to the event have the possibility to utilize that NFT or collectibles of any kind. For example, fan tokens. Fan tokens are often used by clubs more and more in order to interact with their fans, provide a number of options and benefits, etc. Well, if you represent the club, you would want to make sure that in the players' contracts you have that aspect covered, so that players cannot claim that any benefit involving either something relating to their image or even something related to their service by being present at an event, for example, is outside of the scope of the player contract. And vice versa, if you represent the player, you would want to monetize that and say, okay, you pay me for playing, but you also pay me for helping you monetize on the fan tokens and your commercial strategies, etc. And I want to quantify that separately. And at the same time, the lawyer should always consider, as Nandan was mentioning before, that NFTs involve a number of potential issues that anyone who's minting, using, trading, exchanging them should be aware of, including, of course, athletes. It involves securities laws. It involves IP laws. It involves money laundering and tax issues. So it's very important to handle with care this new opportunity, I think, which is big, but it could be possibly a bubble. It could be something that is sustainable long term. The one thing, if we're still in this area and we move from NFTs to cryptos, the one thing I do say to clients, especially if it's athletes, it's just don't invest too much in cryptocurrencies for sure, because your career is pretty short. You have to be very careful, and they're very volatile. So the amount within your own sort of overall asset portfolio that you should be investing in cryptos should be very limited. Don't listen too much to your teammates in the locker room that claim about big gains, and don't get driven, so to speak.
Yes, I think not just athletes, but quite a large chunk of the world could have had that advice for the last year or so. In fact, I think I saw some sports marketing kind of activities last year that involved athletes getting paid in crypto for certain, I don't know if it was marketing or for actually playing for the team, but
also sponsorships. I mean, the crypto exchange platforms have struggled to get visibility and acceptance in the world somehow. And sports, of course, is a fantastic vehicle for an immediate worldwide awareness and brand awareness, name awareness, respectability, etc. So a lot of sponsorships have been coming from that sector. And yes, of course, if it was on them, I mean, they would always prefer to pay in cryptos, but yeah, there is a point of negotiation there, of course.
Okay, guys, so we haven't got too long left. Another question has come in from the audience. I think it's quite a good one, quite simple, but quite good. Does the job of the athlete's agent and the lawyer overlap? Or I suppose, how does the job of the athlete's agent or the lawyer overlap?
This is interesting. Very interesting.
Nandan,
go.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just make it short, but I think Luca would have a better answer. In many ways, many sports agents are actually legally trained, so many are quite familiar with regulation. In other jurisdictions like India, I think we have a lot of people who are marketing agencies. So what they do is they stick to the commercials, so they're actually negotiating price, while the lawyer, in some sense, helps bolster that with both the regulatory and legal advice. But there's huge sort of variation in that. In many cases, you might have a lawyer who's an agent too. We hesitate from sort of participating in commercial negotiations because I think it complicates our own roles there. And I think in Europe, you'll see a much greater diversity, and probably same in the US. But I'll leave it to Luca to do a better job of explaining that.
Well, it's a very good question. It's an old problem that we see where, in theory, a sports lawyer would be in a position, I guess, to represent a client in a negotiation, and that can happen. The problem is what do you really expect from your manager slash agent slash lawyer? Do you expect him to be in the market, focused, 12 months a year, calling you up every time you play a game, or maybe every night after training, talking to you? If that is what the lawyer does, she or he cannot be a good lawyer, a good sports lawyer, because they should devote a lot of time and attention to being at the edge of ever-changing rules and very sophisticated technicalities in relation to contracts. So I do believe that lawyers can be agents, but then let's say their role should be more into focusing on being an agent, and stop being a technical advisor to their clients, and perhaps be helped by someone, perhaps a colleague or somebody that would be more, first of all, because you have to approach a transaction from different angles. You have to be a tax specialist. Sometimes you have to be an IP rights specialist. You have the regulatory aspects. You have the employment aspects there. And unless you master all of these things, and nobody does, of course, you would have to take an integrated approach. In the US, it is pretty common to have sports lawyers acting as agents, but they're usually sole practitioners, or a very like a boutique kind of situation. They definitely don't quite qualify as necessarily as sophisticated specialists in relation to legal advice or tax advice in the sports industry.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you, Luca, and thanks to Brian Tan from Reed Smith for the question. Okay, guys, we've talked quite a lot about different parts of the work. I'd like to find out a little bit more before we finish about the kind of people within sports law and the industry that surrounds them, bearing in mind that the audience will include people maybe weighing up career options and things like that. So Nandan, could I come to you and ask you, what does it take to become a great sports lawyer?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. I'd be a great one if I could be. But I think obviously a love for sport and a love for law are really at the bottom of this. Just a passion for getting things right. But I would say sort of also just building strong legal skills. All of them are useful in sport. Luca gave a great example of how you just have to be an all-rounder. It's not just a specialist, but you have to be specialized at so many different things, right? So many people come in and say, I want to be a sports lawyer. Can I get started? And the advice I always give is just focus on becoming a great lawyer first. Just build that diverse set of skills, and an opportunity might come up like the one Luca found in an airplane, right? So be ready, get your skills in place, go be a good commercial lawyer, be a good corporate governance lawyer, understand intellectual property, but most importantly, sort of seep yourself into that industry, understanding how the business of sport and the governance of sport work. And that really also involves going a few steps back to first principles and understanding concepts of fair play, understanding concepts of a level playing field. There are great debates going on. And as we speak, there's a huge debate on, for example, transgender rights, on inclusion versus fair play. I mean, is that a duality that you can come up against? Whether you're a commercial lawyer or not, follow stuff like that. Understand the issues, understand what's at stake, understand the arguments from both sides. So just getting yourself aware of what sport is about, what the spirit of sport is, the values of sport, and then building on top of that, just understanding the various stakeholders we talked about. What are their interests? Why do they want to participate in sport? What do they want from sport, and what do they want to take out from sport? So just building that toolkit of awareness alongside, I would say, just strong legal skills of drafting, negotiation, presentation. And things come down to, I mean, you could be on the one hand drafting a memo, the next day looking through a press release to make sure it's sort of competition law compliant, a third day in some sense sitting with a young person and their parents trying to negotiate an agent's agreement. So being ready for that sort of complexity, but also the diversity. I can't say I've got to a great sports lawyer yet, but I mean, these are the things I'm working on to get to being a good one.
Well, it was a great answer, Nandan, for a start. Luca, can I put the same question to you? What does it take to become a great sports lawyer?
Yeah, well, things have changed a lot since I made that encounter 25 years ago. Therefore, nowadays it's an established kind of practice. Sports law is established, and so you have sports master programs that you can look at in order to get acquainted. Also, to the industry itself, you can be hired as a trainee in a firm that practices sports law. That doesn't mean that you have to start exclusively doing that. I mean, as Nandan said before, you have to be a good lawyer first. And the other path is being recruited by a sports governing body. So depending on what type of lawyer you want to be, if you want to specialize heavily on regulations, you can narrow your scope and possibly follow a career path that is more institutional in a way, and then continue after that by being a boutique kind of very specialized advisor on, say, regulatory, doping, and that kind of stuff. Or you're a very good, on the other side of the spectrum, let's say you're a very good commercial lawyer, you're a very good corporate lawyer, and you happen to have a number of contacts / clients, or simply a passion for sports, and start advising those stakeholders. And I guess other than that, it's really down to the foundations. Of course, if you want to be an agent, that's a totally different path, because you would just start as a lawyer, but pretty much you will become a deal maker, and that's again another career entirely. As a lawyer, as a true lawyer, I'd say, don't forget about the fundamentals, which is integrity, trustworthiness, honesty, competence, and specialization. We're not living in a world where you can be good at too many different things. You have to specialize and decide early on if you want to be a lawyer or an agent, because that's something that can distract you along the way. If you see opportunities, you see your clients earning a lot of money by intermediating deals or representing players, the temptation to sort of jump and try and get close to an athlete or maybe a club and work as a more in a different fashion, let's say, is always there. It's you have to be true to your own decisions and your own self, I guess.
And fantastic answer, Luca. Thank you very much, guys. I think we've kind of almost reached the edge of our time here. I think that was a great place to finish. Fascinating discussion, covered an incredible amount of ground. I learned a lot there. I don't think I realized previously just what a breadth of the sports industry that a sports lawyer had to understand. Everything from the regulations that might surround European football transfers, all the way through to being at the kind of cutting edge of where cryptocurrency and NFTs are being used. Like someone said, you clearly have to be a real all-rounder when it comes to the law and the sports business as well. Nandan, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today and to share your insights and expertise.
No, thank you, and you did a great job, Kevin. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And Luca, same to you. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us.
Pleasure. Thank you, Kevin, and all of the guys that are part of the audience also for the nice questions they posed.
Indeed. Thanks very much for the questions. Viewers, thank you for joining us. A recording of this video will be available on YouTube and sportbusiness.com in the coming days. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please do share it on your socials. For now, that's it from me, Luca, and Nandan. I'll hand over to Jasper for an outro.
Thank you for a brilliant session. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. As ever, please, any feedback that you have for us, get it to me. I'm Jasper Donat. Very easy to find me on the internet. Let us know what you enjoy. Let us know if there's any topics that you'd like us to cover. But please do get us some feedback. And as ever, we're going to see you next week as we go into the metaverse. And then hopefully we'll see you live in person at All That Matters in September. Thank you for joining.